Assalamualaikum everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's event on water inequality in Lahore. We're joined by Dr. Nousheen Zaidi and Dr. Ameem Lutfi, and they're going to be talking about very interesting interdisciplinary work. So before we jump into that, just quick introductions on our two esteemed speakers. Dr. Nousheen Zaidi has a doctoral degree in biochemistry from the Eberhard Karls University. She's currently faculty at the University of Punjab, where she also serves as the Director of Cancer Research Center. Dr. Ameem Lutfi is a historical anthropologist specializing in transnational mobility and military labor markets. Dr. Lutfi has a Ph.D. in cultural anthropology from Duke University, and today he's joining us all the way from downstairs in the HSS wing, where he is an assistant professor of anthropology and history. So thank you very much, both of you, for your time today. So today we have a biochemist and an anthropology who've done really, in the true spirit of interdisciplinary work, really meticulous, detailed research. They document the variation in quality of water in Lahore, but then I believe you also provide us some optimism about proactive advocacy for change, and we're really looking forward to your results. So without further ado, I'll invite Dr. Nousheen to start her presentation. The general format is that we'll have a brief presentation by Dr. Zaidi and Dr. Lutfi, followed by the Q&A session. So I'll ask the audience to keep their questions till the dedicated session when we'll open it up to the floor.
Okay. Thank you so much, Farah, for the introduction and providing us this platform to discuss our research. Our organization, the Action Research Collective, has been working on this water quality mapping project for Lahore for two and a half years by now. And over this period, we have collected over 1,200 samples from Lahore and evaluated these samples. So today I'm going to present some of the major findings of this project. So I am sure that everyone is aware that there are different kinds of contaminations in water, there are different kinds of water contaminants, but for this project and precisely for this talk, we will focus on one type of contamination, that is microbiological contamination. More precisely on bacterial contamination. Initially, I'll be talking about two types of bacteria. There are fecal coliforms and E. coli. As the name indicates, fecal coliforms are the type of bacteria that originate from fecal matter, and the presence of these bacteria in water indicate that the water is contaminated with sewage water. E. coli is another kind of bacteria, and some types of E. coli are known to cause diarrhea, respiratory illnesses like pneumonia, and also urinary tract infections. So these are the bacteria which are common tests that are done in all basic microbiology labs, and I will first present the data on these tests. But before that, I would like that everyone to have a look at these guidelines that are from Punjab government. So different health organizations like WHO, CDC, all of these organizations provide certain guidelines for quality of drinking water, the standard for drinking water, and these are the guidelines from Punjab government. And I'm not sure whether it is visible or not clearly, but as this table indicates that Punjab, according to these guidelines, there should be no E. coli or coliforms in drinking water. And when I use the term drinking water, normally people think that the water that we only drink or ingest. But if you look at WHO's definition, drinking water is the water that is required for all domestic purposes. That includes drinking, food preparation, and also personal hygiene. So this is the quality of water that is required for all of these purposes. So there is a confusion that when we say drinking water, people think that, okay, we have a separate water for drinking and then there is a water supply and we are using it for other purposes. No, we need this standard for all these domestic uses. WHO has also the similar guidelines for drinking water quality. And I would also like to mention one thing, that in human health terms, according to WHO, Exposure to water and its constituents occur through ingestion, dermal contact, and aerosol inhalation. And the water that we are using for domestic purposes should be safe for lifetime. So we have to take into account differing sensitivities that occur across different life stages, and this water should be also good for immunocompromised individuals, because if there are certain bacteria, maybe we are not impacted by these bacteria which are there in water, but we have to also consider, and this is the standard which WHO requires all the water boards to fulfill. So in the initial phase of this project, our team identified 381 locations across Lahore, and our team went to these places and collected water samples, and these water samples were tested for these three basic microbiological tests. Maybe these tests or the technical details of these tests are not important for this or interesting for this audience, but still I would like to briefly describe, because it's very important to understand. Because wherever we go or present this data, people are always concerned about the validity or sensitivity of these tests. So I would like to emphasize that these are very basic routine microbiological tests, and they're very simple to perform, and they are very simple to analyze. So they are not very technical, at least these three basic tests. These are, and I would specifically like to talk about these two tests, coliform testing and E. coli testing. So how these tests are performed? We bring water to the lab and we spread the water sample on these media plates. These are differential media plates that allow the growth of certain types of bacteria while inhibiting other types of bacteria. So you spread the water or any sample on these plates, and when we observe it next day, the bacteria are visible. You can see the colonies of bacteria grown on these plates. So this first plate, which says, the coliform testing, it shows the growth of bacteria, coliform growth, and the second one is E. coli growth, which gives like green sheen or green like shining bacteria. And the first plate is of heterotrophic plate count. I'll come back to that. It might not be that important in our context. It is important, but we will talk about these two tests. Okay. So in addition to these basic microbiological tests, we also perform molecular advanced tests, which one of these tests is 16S RNA sequencing. I think most people they know about DNA testing. It is similar. In this test, we sequence one component of bacterial RNA, and then we get a sequence result, and this test confirms the identity of bacteria. It's a confirmatory test. So, and we are doing these tests in collaboration with a company, Macrogen, which is based in Korea. So the samples that we collected, we also send these samples abroad for confirmation of our results. Okay, so coming back to this map, our team, as I said, we visited these sites and collected water samples and created this map of coliform positive sites. If you see this map here, I'm sorry, there is, okay. So as you can see here, there are these blue pins. These blue pins indicate the sites where water did not contain any coliform contamination. The squares, the gray squares, are the sites where water was not available from any central government water board or supply. Whereas these red pins, these are the sites where we found that water was contaminated with coliforms and E. coli. Okay, so water was accessible. We found that water was accessible at 209 out of these 381 surveyed sites. And then we identified 7 coliform contamination hotspots as indicated by these red pins. And these were the 7 areas where water was found to be contaminated with coliforms, which means that in these 7 areas, water supply was contaminated with sewage water. In the next stage of our study, we went back to these neighborhoods and collected larger number of samples from each of these neighborhoods, 60 to 70 samples. And we performed these case studies for these areas, and we also collected information on prevalence of waterborne illnesses. It was a survey-based data. We were not able to get data from the local hospitals in these areas, but we surveyed the households where we collected these water samples. So if you look at this map, it shows the results of these case studies. And as you can see here, that in most of these areas, a large number of collected samples were contaminated with coliforms and E. coli. Except for one area, Kirianwala, this one, where there were only 2 samples contaminated. The reason for low prevalence of contamination was that in this area, most of the people are not using the government water, the water coming from Vasa, but they are basically using boring water. So the water was clean in these in most of the households. So if you look at the prevalence of the affected households across these locations, you can see that a very high number of the collected samples were found to be contaminated with coliform, 65% in Charrar and also 65% in Mustafaabad. This was a very, very high prevalence. The next very important thing that I would like to discuss is the daily fluctuation in coliform counts. So this has been a challenge for us since we started working on this project. Whenever we go and present this data to the government organizations or NGOs, they always say that they need some, accurate numbers or similar numbers coming from different labs. I think people do that. Here, people, when they go for medical tests, they go to different labs, 5 labs, and then they keep comparing the results. So I would like to emphasize that biological data cannot be compared like that, especially quantitative data. If it is a yes or no answer, yes, it is still doable. If you remember during COVID, people were doing that they were getting their sample tested from different labs and comparing the results. There was a problem that the COVID results were also, in terms of scientific data, it's called qualitative data, because it was just simple positive and negative response. No, there was no quantitative variable in those reports. But it is still possible to get a number which could indicate the viral load. But WHO and other organizations, they discourage people from sharing those numbers precisely because of this reason, because it was a new disease and people would have misinterpreted the results. And for most RNA based viruses, they just give positive and negative response in any case, but there is possibility. So the same thing is true for coliforms. It is not like a human sample, but still it is a biological sample. And for coliform numbers, we cannot be sure that every day we will get the same number of bacteria in the water samples, because there are multiple factors that are affecting this number. The water pressure could influence the coliform count in water supply, because our hypothesis is that the water is, there is a contamination between the water supply lines and the sewerage lines. So of course the water pressure, storage time, and even temperature can affect the number of coliforms. There are multiple studies that have studied the impact of rise in temperature and the number of coliforms. And there are also some other studies that are, studying the impact of climate change on coliform number in water. So what we did was that we identified a few households in the affected areas, and we started collecting samples from these households on daily basis. And from one such household, we have collected samples for last 75 days. And we are tracking the number of coliforms in their water samples every day. I'm just showing here the data till March. We don't see here any direct correlation between the temperature and the number of coliforms, but you can still see that the number of coliform varies on daily basis. And maybe in the coming months, when the temperature rises, this impact will become more clear. So 88% of the samples that we collected in between January and March were found to be contaminated with coliforms. Okay, so if we come back to these tests again, and this first test, which I said was not very important, heterotrophic plate count, it is not a very important variable, but still it is important because this could indicate it is not a potential public health threat if there is a very high number of these bacteria. It is just like they are just total bacterial count in any water sample, right? So it is not a immediate public health concern, but if this number is very high, it can it indicates that one thing, that the microbiological quality of water is compromised. The other thing is that that whatever treatment method the water supply board is using, it's not working, or it is not that effective. And the third thing is that this high count of HPC also hinders with the detection of pathogenic bacteria. So if there is like a very high number of these bacteria in water and we are performing the test for pathogenic bacteria, we will not get accurate results because there is large number of such bacteria in water. So this test is important, and therefore a lot of organizations, they provide a regulatory limit. Here it's written 500 CFU per ml, but this limit varies among different organizations, and they also provide some additional parameters. They talk about temperature, so it is not that simple. And Punjab government does not have any limit for this test. But as I said, that this test is important, and we found that 86% of the water samples collected from Lahore, they had the HPC level was higher than 500 CFU per ml. And if we set this limit at 1000, it is still 82%. So when I say that these samples have higher HPC or this kind of like overall bacterial count, I'm not saying that it is 1000 or 2000, it is sometimes 20,000, 25, it's very, very high, and it is all across Lahore. So when I used to say, like in my earlier presentations, that okay, only there are 7 neighborhoods where the water quality is compromised, this data shows that it is not only these areas, but it is all across Lahore. And now we are testing for other pathogens other than coliforms and E. coli. We will test for, in the coming months, we will test for other bacteria. So if you can see this map, it shows that HPC level is higher in all areas across Lahore. Okay, there is one more test that we have. This like we just did this test a few days back, but I'm sure that most of the people here would have heard about antibiotic resistance. We know that antibiotic resistance in bacteria is one of the major public health concerns in the very near future, I would say. So we tested these water samples for the presence of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. It is a very simple test in which we spread the sample on such a plate, and then we put these small tablets on the plate, and then we let the bacteria grow. If you see here, there is this zone around this disc, right? It means that the bacteria are resistant, are sensitive to this drug because they're not growing there, but they are resistant to all of the other drugs. So we have tested these water samples. Some of the water samples, we don't have a lot of data, but still we have like data that I'm presenting here, that in this water supply, in Lahore's water supply, we found multi-drug resistant bacteria, which is very scary, and it could be a potential source for spread of this water supply, could also be a source of spreading multi-drug resistant bacteria in the population. In addition to measuring water quality, we are also collecting data on health metrics from these locations. And as you can see here, this line indicates the prevalence of waterborne illnesses in all of these affected areas that I have mentioned in the earlier slides. And we found a correlation between the prevalence of affected households in each of these areas with the prevalence of waterborne illnesses. We also collected data on the access to filtration plants. So in a lot of areas, people were able to access filtered water. And as you can see here, for example, in Shareef Pura, most of the people did not have access to filtration plants. But in Charrar, a large number of population had access to filtration plants, but still the prevalence of waterborne illnesses was too high. And we believe that it is due to the reason because bacterial load is very high in Charrar. So even when people are not using this water for drinking, they are still consuming this water for food preparation or for other domestic purposes. Therefore, the prevalence is too high because the bacterial load is very high. So just drinking this water, drinking some other water is not preventing them from getting ill. In addition to that, we are also collecting data on long-term impacts of waterborne diseases. The recurrent infections, waterborne infections, lead to childhood stunting. So we are collecting data for childhood stunting in different areas, and we have, I'm sorry that the bars are not too visible, but yeah, so this is the national average, and the prevalence in Shareef Pura is very high for stunting. So in some age groups, it is as high as 71%. We are also collecting data, we have also collected data on the prevalence of anemia in all of these neighborhoods. I'm just showing the data from Shareef Pura, and as you can see here, that in children under 5, the prevalence of anemia is 82%, while in women it is 54%. So this contamination and these recurrent waterborne illnesses are not only, these are of course, they are threatening, like whenever any organization or water board, when they talk about water contaminants, microbial contamination is one kind of contamination that has to be addressed immediately, because it has immediate health concerns. So if there is some kind of chemical in water, some of them have like immediate impacts, but most of the chemical contaminations will have their impact after 10 years or 5 years or 6 years. But this kind of contamination can have like an immediate impact, because it can get, like, these are bacterial infections that could easily spread very quickly in any population. So we are not only studying the short-term impacts of water contamination, but we are also collecting data on the long-term impacts of such infections. I think now Dr. Ameem will talk about the intervention initiatives that we are.
Before going into the intervention, because background about like the interdisciplinary aspect of it. The project actually, the collaboration came about fairly organically, where just to give you a little bit of background, where we had been working with various doctors who'd been running health camps, and they had started to first report us instances of like recurring illnesses that were related to waterborne illnesses, and it seemed like this, like the जो पूरे मोहल्ले जो थे उनके मसला हो रहा था, अस्पतालों के अंदर जो है वो अस्पताल वर increasingly clogged, yeah, so like around 30 to like 60% it ranges. All illnesses that the people who come to hospitals actually come with illnesses that are related to water. Yeah, हम स्कूलों के साथ भी कुछ काम कर रहे थे, स्कूलों के साथ भी यही मसला आ रहा था कि अटेंडेंस की कम होने की वजह भी जो थी वो बहुत ज़्यादा जो थी वो हेल्थ रिलेटेड प्रॉब्लम थी, डायरिया, स्किन डिसीजेस, सो ऑन एंड सो फोर्थ. So it was this kind of outcome that eventually led us to kind of really investigate what the problem was. And from an interdisciplinary perspective, I was particularly interested in two issues. One is this question of, is this an everybody problem or is this a specific people problem? और नौशीन ने भी उसके ऊपर थोड़ा बहुत टच किया है, and we've kind of gone back and forth on this question. It is an everybody problem, increasingly in the sense of that there are certain pathogens that exist across the board. But it is a specific people, it is a very specific people problem too. And it is a very specific, and who these specific people are, it is very interesting. जो एक एरिया जिसके अंदर सबसे ज़्यादा प्रॉब्लम आ रहा है, इट्स सरप्राइजिंगली चरर पिंड. और चरर पिंड अगर आप लोगों को जो यहाँ पे हैं, कुछ लोगों को पहले से पता होगा, वो यहाँ पे हम लम्स में जो बैठे हुए हैं, लम्स से मेरे ख्याल से हार्डली 8-10 मिनट की ड्राइव होगा, और डिफेंस के बीच के अंदर सिचुएटेड है. या And the interesting thing is that a lot of the E. coli bacteria that we found in samples in Charrar Pind did not exist in the immediate vicinity even. So defense की जो immediate vicinity थी उसमें problems नहीं थे जो वहाँ पे वो problems थे. So it is a specific people problem. Yeah. And both of these issues, like, you know, that depending on if it is a specific problem or a general everybody problem, it changes how we start to address it. And that's the second reason, the second interdisciplinary aspect that got me interested in it, which is what can we really do about it? Yeah, anthropology के अंदर खास तौर पे एक increasing trend हुआ है that we, you know, anthropology is one of those disciplines that no longer just studies the problem, but is kind of advocates for this kind of engaged research in which you endeavor towards some kind of remedial action, some kind of, you know, emulative actions at least. So उसके बारे में कर क्या सकते हैं? हमने इस चीज़ के ऊपर नौशीन ने हमने बहुत ट्रायल एंड एरर भी किया है, हमने मुख्तलिफ चीज़ें ट्राई की, हमने मुख्तलिफ एवेन्यूज़ ट्राई की, एंड इट विल बी, यू नो, आई वांट मे बी ले आउट सम ऑफ देम, एंड देन जब डिस्कशन होगा, डिस्कशन के अंदर हम उसके अंदर फिर ज़्यादा गहराई में जा सकते हैं अबाउट व्हाट रियली हैज़ एन इम्पैक्ट एंड व्हाट डजंट रियली हैव एन इम्पैक्ट. One of the things that we started, and this is recent, कि हमने एक वहाँ पे अपनी क्लिनिक शुरू की है. ये क्लिनिक जो है, it is focused mainly on stunting, and Nousheen talked about how stunting is one of the kind of biggest impact of waterborne illnesses, जिसकी वजह से आपकी entire generations जो हैं वो underdeveloped होती हैं. So it's a stunting is not only is it not incurable, is it not only is it you know, we can't cure it, but it actually it impacts last generations. वो एक generation से दूसरी generation के अंदर pass होते हैं. So we started to collect data through this clinic, give some kind of, you know, health supplements, and keeping more longitudinal track of very specific population, ताकि हमें उनके जिसके अंदर हमने एक पॉपुलेशन आइडेंटिफाई की है और वो रेगुलरली हमारी क्लिनिक में आते हैं. उन बच्चों का हम स्कूल रिकॉर्ड भी रखते हैं, उनका हेल्थ रिकॉर्ड भी रखते हैं. So it gives us this kind of stable population that we're trying to track longitudinally, to study its both its impact better, and to see, you know, like, can certain interventionist measures actually help us a little bit with it. This is just the kind of the process of that the clinic follows. उसके साथ साथ हमने जो है we started these workshops. ये वर्कशॉप जो है इसके अंदर जो है अक्सर बहुत बेसिक चीज़ें होती हैं जो हम लोगों को बताते हैं, लेकिन ये बेसिक चीज़ों से फ़र्क आना शुरू हो जाता है. एक तो जैसे बहुत बेसिक बात थी जो नौशीन ने बताई कि there's a misrecognition of what drinking water includes. Yeah, so people think that only the water that you drink is actually drinking water, and people who think that they get water from the filter plant, it doesn't matter if अगर उनका पानी साफ है कि गंदा है, क्योंकि वो पीने के लिए तो फिल्टर प्लांट से ही ले रहे हैं या बॉटल ले रहे हैं. लेकिन you know, like, if you know, when you wash your food, when you cook with it, when you make tea with it, when you bathe with it, when you know, gargle with it, उन सारी चीज़ों से भी आप पे impact आ जाए. So there are small things, and sort of talking about, you know, how डिपेंडिंग ऑन क्या प्रॉब्लम है उसके वाटर को सही करने का भी डिफरेंट तरीके हो सकते हैं. खासतौर पर जैसे अगर आपके पानी के अंदर कुछ एरियाज़ के अंदर, जैसे शरीफपुरा के एरिया के अंदर लेड बहुत ज़्यादा है, तो जहाँ पे लेड बहुत ज़्यादा है वहाँ पे हम बॉयलिंग लोगों को नहीं कह सकते, क्योंकि जब बॉयल करते हैं तो पानी का लेड का कॉन्सेंट्रेशन और ज़्यादा बढ़ जाता है. इट बिकम्स मोर हार्मफुल. या सो डिपेंडिंग ऑन द एरिया वी हैव डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ, you know, measures that we talk to people, and most of these workshops that we've been doing in collaboration with schools. We've had this very strong belief that, you know, whatever neighborhood you go to, वहाँ पे आप किसी ना किसी किस्म का institutional partners होते हैं, किसी ना किसी किस्म के आपके community partners होना चाहिए, and we've this kind of collaboration with schools through clinics and workshops and so on, it's actually proved fairly helpful. ये तस्वीर हमने जो अपना एक we built a community center as well in one of those areas. There's a picture from that. So this is the and we've been doing, I mean, this is related to it. Schools के अंदर, while the water workshops have been like very small, like एक डे की वर्कशॉप होती हैं या मैक्सिमम 2 दिन की होती हैं, लेकिन जो स्कूल जो है which is meant to not just kind of inform people about what to do about this problem, but to make them have a stake in it, have them more conscious of it, more aware of it, and have a more direct buy-in into this interventionist procedure. So we've run this, these schools usually winters के अंदर हम run करते हैं, winters में time होता है, 1 महीने का होता है, program होता है, 12 स्कूलों में हमने किया है. So we've done it once and we're going to do it again in the coming year, and where we involve students in these different activities, and the whole point is to develop some kind of buy-in into this problem. But beyond sort of these kind of more community-based measures, we've also been thinking about what to do at a kind of like more broader scale. Government की सतह के ऊपर क्या किया जा सकता है इस problem के बारे में, और that is the area I think in which we'd love to hear more feedback upon, because it is a problem that we've kind of hit the wall against in several parts. We started off this process by initially just writing letters to different concerned bodies. तो हमने जो स्टडी की थी उस स्टडी का हम डेटा, उनकी समरी रिपोर्ट्स, वो हमने लोगों को भेजी. उन कम्युनिटी में लोगों के हमने दस्तखत करवा के उनके साथ पिटीशन करके हमने भेजे, और ये हमने वासा को भी सबमिट की. We've submitted it to representative of the Punjab government as well. So we've tried to contact different government departments in it. लेकिन इसके अंदर जो है हमें बहुत ज़्यादा we haven't had a lot of encouraging feedback from or encouraging support from it. One of the problems that often exists जो वो होती है कि वो अक्सर हमें जवाब देते हैं कि नहीं, हमारे सैंपल्स के मुताबिक, हमारे टेस्ट के मुताबिक तो ये पानी बिल्कुल साफ है. और उसके अंदर एक जो फंडामेंटल डिफरेंस जो है, जिस तरह हम टेस्ट करते हैं वो टेस्ट करते हैं, वो लोग टेस्ट करते हैं नॉर्मली सोर्स पॉइंट के ऊपर, हम टेस्ट करते हैं डिलीवरी पॉइंट के ऊपर. तो सोर्स पॉइंट के ऊपर अक्सर हो सकता है उनका पानी साफ हो, और ये पानी साफ भी करते हैं. और दूसरा ये है कि हम रैंडम टेस्टिंग करते हैं. वो लोग जो है अक्सर अपनी टेस्ट दे प्लान इट सो दैट कि जब क्लोरीन पानी में डाला जाता है, जब पानी को ठीक किया जाता है, उसके फ़ौरन बाद वो टेस्ट करते हैं. तो हमने उसके फ़ौरन बाद किया तो साफ आएगा ही आएगा. सो देयर इज दिस इशू अबाउट whose test should one believe in? Is it our test? Is it their test? Should it be at the source point? Should it be at the delivery point? And these are all thorny issues. These are all thorny issues that needs to be sorted out. And I want to maybe emphasize that often it seems like it is a technocratic problem, that we don't have enough information on it, we don't have enough knowledge on it. But if you look at just the kind of amount of policy proposals and policy reports and recommendations that have been presented on it, it's actually quite a bit. और 2006 से लेके मेरे ख्याल से 7 या 8 पंजाब ने अलग उसके अंदर पॉलिसी और अपनी प्रेजेंट की हैं. सो हर कुछ साल, नई साल बाद एक नई डेडिकेशन के साथ उनका आता है कि हमने पानी को साफ़ करना है और ये सारे प्रॉब्लम्स टेक केयर करने हैं. और लेकिन फॉर सम रीज़न इट नेवर रियली गोज़ एनीवेयर. एंड देयर आर सर्टेन इश्यूज वी कैन टॉक अबाउट. व्हाट वन इज़, जो मैंने कहा कि जो पाइपलाइन वाला इशूज़ है, ये एक पाइपलाइन वाला इशू जो है, इट इज़ वन ऑफ दोज वेरी थॉर्नी इशूज अबाउट हु कंट्रोल्स इट. In most of the policies, I think a few asides, it's usually been that the WASA is supposed to be responsible even for the pipelines themselves. So they are supposed to be pipeline, लेकिन उसके अंदर भी एक टेक्निकल इशू आता है कि वो कहते हैं कि नहीं, पाइपलाइन तक पानी ठीक है, लेकिन वो जो थोड़ा सा एरिया जो पाइपलाइन से नलके तक है, उसमें जो पाइप है, उस पाइप के अंदर गंदगी आई है. So so it's a very difficult point to prove कि actually कि नहीं, it's not that the kind of the 1.5 फुट के बीच में आने की probability बहुत कम है, लेकिन जो 150 फुट आपका जो पानी पाइप चल रहा है उसके अंदर ज़्यादा खराबी आती है. And normally that's why even this kind of like why it is some people problem is because of this issue of infrastructural neglect, that these pipelines are old and they have rusted, और ख़ास तौर पे जिन इलाकों में पानी की सप्लाई की कमी है वहाँ पे वो लोग ये they put these kind of donkey pumps जिन्हें कहते हैं suction pumps, वो पानी जब नहीं भी होता तो खींचने लगते हैं, तो आपके सरफेस के अंदर भी जहाँ पे अगर कहीं सीवरेज का पानी खड़ा हुआ है तो उसको खींचना शुरू कर देता है, तो उसकी वजह से पानी जो है वो गंदा आना शुरू हो जाता है. So so who is really responsible for this? The pipeline part of it. That is remains a thorny issue. But other than like हमने जब ये खुतूत लिखे, हमने petition लिखी, उसके ऊपर कोई support नहीं आया. Maybe Nousheen can talk about it. There was a point in time where they tried to sue us for these reports too. But then we even went on to we were very committed to more community-based actions around it. So हमने जिस एरिया में मेनली हमारा ये जो कम्युनिटी सेंटर भी था, जहाँ पे हमने स्कूल भी किए थे, वहाँ पे हमने कुछ लोगों के हमने we created this campaign around it, awareness campaign around it, which eventually we took to the DC office. और DC ऑफिस के अंदर जाके हमने वहाँ पे एक सिट इन भी किया था, हमने वहाँ पे धरना दिया था, जिसके बाद eventually we got the DC office to come and at least what they did was कि उसके बाद आके उन्होंने मुख्तलिफ एरियाज के अंदर सीवरेज जो ब्लॉक हुई थी सीवरेज को क्लियर करना शुरू कर दिया. तो क्लियर करने से मतलब परमानेंट सोल्यूशन तो नहीं आएगा, लेकिन उससे एटलीस्ट ये हुआ कि जो पानी जो खड़ा हो जाता था जिसकी वजह से जब सक्शन होता था तो ख़राब होता था, वो पानी थोड़ा सा बेहतर होने लगा. But that's not a permanent solution. It was a kind of a more band-aid kind of emergency solution that came about it. And I understand the DC points. DC office का भी जो main issue था, वो said we just don't have the fundings required for a massive operation that is needed to find a more permanent solution, which is relaying all of the pipelines. And often even during election seasons के अंदर we try to make this an important election issue, at least to create some kind of demand from the supply side for access to clean water. But the problem often, we've talked to like different political representatives, the option they often debate is like, okay, do I spend this amount of money in fixing the pipelines, which many may not be able to see, the effect of which will take time for people to see, or do I just go and rebuild the roads? And often, or most often, what people do is they just go and rebuild the road. So politically as well, it's very difficult, or to create some kind of support around it. हमने awareness के ऊपर शुरू किया था, and hopefully we have hope that like over a certain period of time, at least some areas के अंदर वो demand इतनी बढ़ जाएगी that political representatives will have to at least concede in some way to fixing this problem. We've also tried to Asad Jamal यहाँ पे आए हैं, who's we've been working with Asad Saab in also creating some public action litigation around it, in taking to the court this issue. But and we'll eventually do it. But the limitation with that is that even if we get a judgment in our favor and the court says yes, you're right, there is this problem and these pipelines are ultimately supposed to. I mean, we have specific strategies we're taking. One is sorting out this issue court के अंदर, sorting out this issue who's responsible for the pipelines, and the second issue जो policy report आती है उसके अंदर recommendation that the government or the supplying body should also be should conduct regular tests. Yeah, but it doesn't really specify who should conduct this test and who should be the adjudicating body in verifying those tests. Right now, it is the body that supplies it is also the body that is responsible also for testing the value of the test. So, and that doesn't work. So we're trying to take go to the court on around these two issues. But even if we get the two resolved, the issue is does that will that create enough of a push to create to lead it to some kind of infrastructural repair? That remains a question mark, but I think all of these options are still worth exploring. They're worth testing. just because of the seriousness of this problem. And the other thing that we're trying to do is we're take it beyond Lahore. हम कराची के अंदर भी इसको अब शुरू करना चाह रहे हैं, which is the problem of Karachi is many folds worse in some ways. So I'm not going to take too much time in it. We've been working with different organizations, just in the farm, the both educational institutes, research institutes, pharmacies, and so on. And we hope to kind of expand this network just because the scale of the problem is so wide. And the intensity of the problem is so serious, and the impact of it is so serious that it is a problem that one cannot really leave, or nobody can really do it on its own. So we want to, at least that's जो हम यहाँ पे भी आके बात करें, is to create some kind of, support based around, some kind of network around it, and we'd love to hear more from you guys about it. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Ameem and Nousheen. So I want to open up the floor for questions. Yeah, please go ahead.
And some maybe around the intervention. So Nousheen, like you were doing RNA testing, have you found, is there a Lahore bacteria in this 20,000 HPA? Have they finally, so that's one question, like in your RNA testing, have you found something that is, we know it's antibiotic resistant, but is there something like unique in the new, that this, because that does impact, the society has produced then some biological impact, as I would read it. And then, in some ways, Ameem, I kind of wanted you to be more of an anthropologist. Like, how are people responding culturally? Like, so what is the kind of knowledge systems that are being deployed to deal with illness? Because to me, that seems like that would be the anthropological kind of way of trying to work this. And I assume that's how you did the education stuff anyway. And then finally, I suppose you need a structural engineer, because I didn't get a sense of what the water and sewerage infrastructure is and where are the points. I mean, you did mention it a little bit again, but I suppose it's like, well, the intervention would be like, here's a civil engineer now who's gone in there and said, look, this is what we need to do with the structure that exists. So there you go. Quite big questions, but take what you like.
About the cultural thing, I think the culturally, interestingly, especially for women and mothers, like a lot of these issues were very natural and very immediate to kind of explain to it, because it is so closely related to childbearing and healthcare. That's where water usually, or the pinpoint is usually when you talk about children and talk about growth. But it's also related to this bigger problem of patriarchal households, of the some households. So so you need, the concerned parties are usually not the parties that are associated or sort of have the authority to kind of make it a more political issue. So that's kind of one of the issues. And we've we've worked with religious, like masjidon ke saath, we've talked with mosques and started created this some recognition around ke wuzu ke liye qabil nahi hai, so which has had some impact on it. Some stats, like global stats, so those things we found to have some better response than others. The engineering problem, I think you're absolutely right. The engineering problem is, and one of the serious limitations of our work is exactly that we don't have a very good idea about the pipeline infrastructure, and that definitely is one of the main areas that we're trying to build, expand our network base to have somebody who can talk about those kind of things.
Really interesting session. My question's for Dr. Ameem. You mentioned 4 different interventions you made. Which one was the most impactful? Have you measured the data? And can you give some insights about that?
Yeah, it's very difficult to answer because some have short-term impact, some have long-term impact. So I'd say, the most direct impact that was very visible was जब हमने धरना किया था, जब हमने जाके दफ्तर बंद कर दिया था उनका, तो उसके बाद उनके पास कोई ऑप्शन नहीं था, उन्हें आना पड़ा था. So that was the most direct impact. But is it long-term? Was it the most sustainable action? I'm not sure. So I think in terms of long-term action, I still believe that it has to be creating some demand where people demand it from political representative, that it becomes an election issue.
And these initiatives are like, they're very recent, so we have to see when we collect data and analyze which form of intervention is most effective.
So we should talk more after because this overlaps with my work on air pollution. Lekin, I have 3 comments / questions. A, so you said this is it's an everybody problem, which is what I agree with, because that's the same thing with air pollution, is the rich people and the poor people all are exposed. But the reaction is pretty much endogenous, right? So the fact is that rich people can engage in, or those who are much more informed can engage in avoidance behavior, right? So in the case of air pollution, for example, we see folks installing air purifiers, reallocating time use, spending more time indoors versus outdoors, etc., procuring particular filtering masks and using them when they're outside. So in that sense, I think this is a question of how informed individuals are and how do we really kind of scale up the kind of avoidance behavior that they can take to kind of protect themselves from. So, so sort of thoughts on that. The second thing, I think that we have to sort of separate adaptation and avoidance from mitigation. So on air pollution, identifying sources is much easier, right? Because it's mostly stationary or mobile sources. It's either vehicles or you see smoke coming out of factories. In your case, it's much more challenging because water pollution tends to be non-point source. So it could be agriculture's runoff or runoff from post rain, sewage, etc. So, but is there a way of figuring out? I mean, there's a lot of evidence, of course, that Nousheen presented that the water, it's undeniable that the water quality is terrible. But what really are those sources? Because once you have a good handle on that, then directing mitigation sort of efforts or strategies becomes easier, right? So then even policymakers have a better sense of, okay, these are the sources, this is where we need to go and sort of, nip the problem in the bud. And the third comment is on collective action, and that's what we're trying to do on air pollution too. I think the problem seems to be that community level collective, folks find it easier, it's like less costly to put your name on a petition. But then when it really comes to then kind of following up on that, you really need community leaders, people who like have that momentum behind them, who can keep kind of negotiating and arbitrating with policymakers. On air pollution, the problem seems, I'm pretty sure that's the same case with water, is that this responsibility has been delineated to the Environmental Protection Department. But in practice, it's often done by more powerful departments like P&D, for example. If you want to get stuff done on transport, right? EPD has some authority to go and kind of like limit traffic, but really like it becomes like a turf war between the EPD and the transport department at the end. And then you need some powerful bureaucrat to kind of draw the line somewhere and kind of call the shots. So in that sense, I think it's not just kind of like creating the momentum and pushing people. You need community leaders, but also I think at the bureaucratic level, like who's going to deal with this problem is also really not that clear cut. So it also entails kind of sitting with them and figuring out who really has the responsibility there. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. My first question is about this idea of, again, like, is this for everyone? Is this an everyone problem? Is this a someone problem? And I'm a humanities person, so bear with me. So I want to think a little bit about this idea of sort of bodies, especially in the context of, post or current context of COVID-19, we've learned very quickly that, bodies are not singular, right? And so how can we think about perhaps also this idea of water and the sort of circulation of water and also of sewage as something that is not, we're not contained, right? We leak, and in leaking, we leak into other people. And so perhaps there's something to be thought of here in terms of ideas of community and also things that push up against sort of our ideas of how stratification works and might trouble it a bit. And also extending this to the context of also not just bodies, but also, space, right? Territories, right? This is going somewhere. The water, where is the water going, right? Where is it coming from? Who and what is being impacted? What are the kinds of, flora and fauna that are also being impacted by this? I wonder about, animal and bird life, for example, or even plant life. And then my second question is about the currents of information that are these sort of educational workshops that sound really amazing. I'm curious about the kinds of circuits of misinformation. I'm always really curious about how people manage to not get sick from water, because I get sick all the time. And so when I ask questions, there's always sort of very interesting answers about that are almost kinds of different types of folk concepts of how to not get sick. And I think that these transcend transcend gender and class, right? So people will have very different ideas about how to not get sick from water, or different types of potentially superstitions. So I'm curious if you encountered any of that, and if that information or misinformation, so to speak, how you work with that in your workshops. Thank you.
Hello. I have like two comments, and the first one is a question. When you were generally first mentioning the type of research that you carried out on microbial contamination that exhibits both short-term and, for example, long-term impacts on the community. So my first question is this, for example, like research ongoing to see the genetic impact that it has, for example, on individuals, because that could be something very you could say like catastrophic to like prompt a response from the international community to hold, for example, like general regional bodies accountable to have more of an impact. So like that's my first question, and the second one is just a comment that I have is basically a response which could be to like get the government, for example, like involved, because you said that they denied your request and research, saying okay, these are the results that we have, which differ from the results that you had from your research. So what could, for example, be like a potential catering to that, with like a partnership between an external body and the government to like facilitate a like joint action or joint research toward that, not like cater to that a difference that they're getting in both researches.
I think we can answer a few questions and then. Yeah.
Should I go ahead? Yeah, so you mentioned antibiotics resistance. Like, let's say you come up with some sort of large funding in the form of government intervention. I don't really see how you are going to solve this problem, because there's always this probability that whenever you go with any sort of intervention, that some sort of a sample will mutate, and over time the sample will grow. So to me, it seems like this sort of a vicious cycle, that no matter which intervention or strategy you go for, the numbers are not going to decrease, or even if they decrease over a short period of time, over the long term, the numbers are going to become stable once again.
Sorry, I did not understand your question. You're saying that these bacteria will keep on mutating?
Yeah, because there is always this element of antibiotic resistance, so over time the number will eventually grow.
Okay. So when we're talking about antibiotic resistance for this particular research that we are doing, there is a simple solution, that there should be no contamination in water. So these bacteria are specifically coming from sewerage water. So if the government and the WASA and other water boards work on that, it could be easily sorted. It is not a problem that this is not a kind of bacteria that is mutating. It is the bacteria that is coming into the water stream because of contamination, right? So the other, you asked about the genetic effects of this kind of problem or contamination. So the thing is that bacterial contamination or diarrhea or these diseases they're not genetically transferred. They do not have an impact on our genes per se, but it could have a generational impact. For example, of a stunting. If the mother is stunted, there are chances that her children will also be stunted. So it could have a so when we say genetic, no, it is not genetic. Of course, it doesn't get into our genes, but there is a generational impact of recurrent infections or that are happening due to water pollution, right? There was like a comment on whether it is a problem for everyone or for specific communities. I know I showed a few slides which the people would have thought that maybe this is a problem that everyone in Lahore is facing. It is true that for certain parameters, certain aspects, the water is contaminated for all across Lahore. But this is not a problem. It is not everyone is facing this problem, because this problem is far more, it is bad in the low-income neighborhoods. As I said, that there are 7 neighborhoods that we found, that we identified. They are all low-income neighborhoods where the water supply is contaminated with coliforms, with sewage water. And if you, as like Ameem gave the example of Charrar, we tested 75 samples from DHA. All those samples were clean. Charrar is getting water from the same water board, that is cantonment board. And in Charrar, 85, sometimes 85, sometimes 65, we have like collected water samples 3 times by now. And the water contamination is so high, the bacterial load is significant, like it's extremely high. And as I have shown you, that the prevalence of waterborne illnesses is very high in Charrar. We don't have the data for DHA, but I'm sure there will be like a stark difference between the prevalence of these diseases. So of course it is, and it is very, like, I don't get it when it is the same water board, they have like the same water supply lines. It means that they are not repairing the lines in these areas. They're just, maintaining the DHA lines and not working on Charrar. So, Ameem, would you like to say something?
Yeah, maybe a few questions. Ek to pehle, to Saval's question, Saval, like the, I agree. I mean, like this issue of like, like can rich people opt out of it with like, something like filtered water laga liya, aapne kar liya. To some extent, yes, but as as Nousheen was pointing out, the viral load or intensity is so high that unless आप बिल्कुल ही उसको यूज नहीं कर रहे, आप नहाने धोने के लिए भी नहीं यूज कर रहे, आप किसी चीज के लिए नहीं यूज कर रहे, you will get impacted by it, right? And well, I mean, one of the things that we've tried to kind of do it, and it's one of the interventions that we have, I didn't talk about, is that we try to create some kind of month or regular water testing services, mainly directed to more upper class neighborhoods, which gives them some, or makes them at least more aware of what, and sort of motivates them to action. Like mixed results आए हैं हमारे उसके अभी तक, but might be an execution problem on our side. The issue about community, I absolutely agree. I think like there's so many NGO efforts that are take on these keywords of community mobilization, community words, but they don't it doesn't, the structure of a lot of those organizations is such that it does not actually allow for community building. Here, I think we have a distinct advantage of the kind of how we've structured our organization and how we've built our stuff. That it is slightly easier for us to build those communities. And one thing that we've been doing is not just having this kind of parachute approach. कि आप वहाँ पे गए और आपने फिर बाहर आ गए आपने ऊपर से. We've been building like doing this community schools that we've been doing for a little while. So the hope is that over time some of those people will end up taking these as these genuine issues and they take it more seriously. And the second thing is working with schools and school principals, which gives us a clear idea of some level of community leaders who we can appeal to, who understand our language, who are interested in talking to us, and maybe leading some effort with that. The issue of source, I agree. I think the issue of source is one. Virinder ke like connecting to his question, I think that's where we need more structural engineer supports to kind of really work that out. And I agree that is one thing we need to work more on. To get to questions about these connections between, I mean, absolutely right. I mean, the whole anthropological idea about like decentering the human being. A lot of this work makes it very clear that it is at some level the bacteria that go from one body end up being in another one's body. So what's more like connection that, but so yes, it is the kind of the nature of the problem is such that it is very inherently not an individual problem, but it is a connection problem, or it is about a community problem. But the question of like what's the impact on flora and fauna of that, maybe Nousheen can have a better idea on it.
And you were saying that how does it impact, plants or animals, this kind of contamination. The type of contamination that I'm talking about, it is specifically bad for human beings. Because it is, it is the contamination of fecal matter. So if there is such contamination in the water, it is good for the plants. So we don't have to worry about the plants. But yeah, for animals and human beings, because these bacteria can also have impact on, and we are not like, in case of Charrar, when I spoke to the cantonment board people, they were saying that this contamination is not like it is like not the sewerage lines, but because they have these kettles. You remember, Fizza, they said that because they have these animals and kettles, and because of that the water was contaminated. I'm not sure, but that's what they claim at least. Yeah.
Maybe briefly, I'll touch on the circuits of misinformation question. Um, I, I think, more than that, I think what I've been surprised about is how, even when these kind of, preconceived or sort of, you call it myths or misinformation, what exists, I've been surprised about how little people are sold onto them, and how willing a lot of the people are in changing their position on it. So this kind of information, we've never found it as this kind of a wall that you can't cross. Yeah.
So I think this question about whether it's somebody's problem or everybody's problem is actually important, because actually when I was looking at your data, it seems it's somebody's problem. It's not everybody's problem. Because if it's everybody's problem, then it's a problem of the city.
Yeah.
And if it's a problem of the city, then the political structure of the city does not represent the city as a whole. So, then we have basically a common pool problem where each MNA or local government person from a union council will be looking at the sectional interests. And, why would they want to take the collective action for the whole city? Right? And we don't have a mayor for the city that is elected by the city. But if it's somebody's problem, then I think the problem there politically is that if you have even the representative of that body making a lot of noise, you need the city administration to respond. And the city administration to put money into upgrading the infrastructure. So I think what's going to be the governance mechanism there, I think the real opportunity, and I think this would be really important because it's fascinating stuff, is how do we think about city governance, right? From a point of view of a public health crisis, that how do you make, if it's somebody's problems, how do you make commitments to upgrading in localized infrastructures to bring them up to standard, something that is bought in by the city. The one last thing I think, which is a problem of the air pollution work, they never talk about where the financing for this is going to come from. So, the fact of the matter is that city taxes are in Pakistan are one of the lowest in the world. So when you talk about massive upgrades of infrastructure, it's going to be really hard to also finance them unless you get the taxation link working. So if you have public health crises which are related to low-income communities, then you want richer communities to pay for that, which means that the city fiscal structure has to be fixed to move this. Just some stuff.
I visited Charrar Pind yesterday for my environment project, and like there was a water cooler जिसमें पानी था, and like it was literally in the middle of piles of garbage. And when we asked them कि ये पानी साफ है या नहीं, so the people did say कि हाँ हम साफ पानी पी रहे हैं, but it was quite visible कि इतनी ज़्यादा इर्द-गिर्द मक्खियाँ थी और literal मतलब garbage के दरमियान में वो पानी था, so automatically the water was not clean because of all of that. So like I actually experienced this yesterday, and we actually saw कि जैसे ही हम उस जगह से बाहर निकले तो like जो DHA के water coolers थे वो बिल्कुल साफ थे, filtered पानी वहाँ से आ रहा था, and like जो उसका जिस तरह आपने कहा था, the delivery point was actually clean, which is the most important thing.
I'm also taking this course this semester. It's called Methods in Environmental Studies, and we're doing a project coincidentally on a very similar topic, which is water contamination and its effects on human health. And we're specifically looking at visual water contamination because we're a group of 3 students, and we went into Charrar Pind as well. And over there, the main limitation that we found for ourselves, because we were looking at visual water contamination, right? So we could see the water was polluted and stuff. But when we asked people कि आप कैसे लेते हैं, आप पीने के लिए पानी कैसे अपना साफ़ करते हैं इस तरह वगैरह, they were like हम उबाल लेते हैं, we boil the water and like वो साफ़ होता है, हमारे और बहुत मसले, तो इसलिए हम like अभी हमें ये इतना प्रॉब्लम लगता नहीं है. So when we try to convince them that अभी हमारे पास we don't have the resources to actually test the microbial contamination, लेकिन इसमें हो सकती है, तो आपको like बीमारियाँ like आपकी ज़्यादा होती नहीं, don't you get sick more often? And most of their answers were that अगर हमारा पानी उबाल रहे तो like साफ़ है पानी, we don't see a problem with that. So one of the problems that we faced was actually trying to convince them कि आपका पानी अगर गंदा है तो फिर आप ना इस्तेमाल करें. So like I wanted to ask, how did you really tackle that problem? Because creating that awareness in people कि अगर ये पानी गंदा है, so like even convincing them कि ये पानी गंदा है, because they wouldn't really agree कि आपको कैसे पता है गंदा है, हम अगर कह रहे हैं तो we've had this water for generations, तो कैसे गंदा हो सकता है. And like just convincing them and just making them agree कि ये अगर गंदा है तो it's bad for your health, so don't consume it. Because even if they know it's bad for their health, they say that we have other problems to actually focus on, तो ये इतना big issue नहीं है because we don't really get sick that often. So like that was what I wanted to ask, how did you tackle that problem of like creating that awareness?
So my question was that Dr. Nousheen, you talked about how the anemia rates in women and children, they were affected by the contamination, right? So because obviously like tackling the issue at its source, which is actually getting clean water, that seems like a difficult issue if the government isn't cooperating, if there's so many like other external parties that aren't cooperating. So is there anything done for these specific demographics? Like I know you guys have the workshops and the schools, but for these specific demographics, like is there any support, or can there be anything to like support the women of the place or the children of the place specifically?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. Great presentation. My question is that we've talked about issue and now we know that it's severe, but it's mostly supply side. You talked about infrastructure, you talked about funding, but I think it's also more of a demand side issue, and whether you fix supply side or not, it's important, just like she mentioned, that you fix it on the demand side as well. And secondly, do you think water pricing can be a solution? I know that Pakistan does charge for water, but I know majority of us at least don't pay it. I mean, I remember not seeing water bill in my house for the last 10 years. So do you think that can be a solution? But how would you make sure that that structure is also equitable? Because we know that majority of our population is not earning a lot. They're not an elite class. So how would that be an, solution for them?
I mean, I want to take on like maybe this first issue of like people's perception के उनको समझ नहीं आता. I mean, it's interesting that you found that क्योंकि हमने Dr. Farah and I, we teach this class here, जिसके अंदर हमने लोगों से जाके we asked the people about to rank the quality of their water, and we also tested the water that they collected from it. And the surprising thing was that जो लोग खुद रिपोर्ट कर रहे थे कि उनका पानी कितना साफ है और जो टेस्ट में आ रहा था वो 19-20 फर्क था उनमें. So it's round about the same. So and the we asked people about आपके घर पिछले 2 हफ्तों में waterborne illnesses कितनी हुई हैं, and we checked that with sort of hospital records, and that was again round about the same. So I am not convinced that people don't know about the intensity of the problem. I think they already know. This question about and I think that's why the kind of the demand side problem I think is more related to जो चीमा साहब भी बात कर रहे थे about there's no proper avenue. Where do you go and complain about it? Do you write to WASA? Do you write to the DC government? Do you write to the local government? Do you write to your local government? किसको लिखना है? Yeah, so there's no, or like who do you go to demand from it? I think वो इतना quagmire बन गया है, उसमें इतनी overlapping और उसमें इतने gaps हैं that these issues just fall in the gap, and people have no hopes that whatever they say will get recognized. Even जब हमने election के ऊपर उठाना है, हमने जो whenever we've kind of mobilized, we've actually never really had a trouble with convincing people this is a serious issue. People have always been convinced. What we've had a hard time convincing them is that कि हम जो कर रहे हैं उससे कोई फर्क पड़ेगा. That people are not convinced about. So that I think once we convince people कि ये करेंगे तो उससे फर्क पड़ेगा, then I think the intensity of the problem people realize it. Yeah, I think it is fundamentally a local government issue, and the unless that's sort of like straightened out in some way, you're right. I mean, it's like I don't know what there's anything to be done about it until that.
मैं बिल्कुल आई एग्री विद अमीम. हमें कभी भी ये प्रॉब्लम नहीं हुई लोगों को कन्विंस करने में. इनफैक्ट बाज़ लोगों को इस बात पे कन्विंस करने में प्रॉब्लम हुई है कि आपका पानी थोड़ा सा साफ़ है, बिकॉज लाइक एवरीबडी इज़ कन्विंस्ड कि उनका पानी गंदा है पाकिस्तान में. और आपने जो अनीमिया का और वुमेन स्पेसिफिक इंटरवेंशनल प्रोग्राम्स का आप पूछ रही थी, एक तो आपने ये स्टंटिंग क्लिनिक वाला जो हमारा काम है, इसके अलावा वी वर ऑल्सो डूइंग आयरन सप्लीमेंटेशन ड्राइव्स इन डिफरेंट एरियाज़. स्पेशली चूँकि डेटा जो मैंने आपको दिखाया था इट वाज फ्रॉम शरीफ पुरा. सो शरीफपुरा में हमने यहाँ पे हमारी कुछ और जो आई भी है टीम, वो भी यहाँ जिन्होंने ये इंटरवेंशन की थी, ये आयरन सप्लीमेंटेशन ड्राइव को कंडक्ट किया था. दे इवन they just went there, collected blood samples, टेस्ट किया, जो स्पेसिफिक लोगों को आइडेंटिफाई किया, and then we went back to them and gave them iron supplements, and we went back for another blood test after a month or so. Unfortunately लोगों ने आयरन सप्लीमेंट्स नहीं लिए थे, या वो एक बंदे ने, बाकी पूरे घर के किसी एक ने वो का. दिस वाज अ प्रॉब्लम एक्चुअली. बच्चों को हम देकर आए तो वो बड़ों ने खा लिया. आई डोंट नो व्हाई इट हैपेंड. तो वो चूँकि हमारा शरीफपुरा में, वी आर नॉट बेस्ड इन शरीफपुरा, चुंगी में हमारे लिए ज़रा ज़्यादा आसान है टू कनेक्ट विद पीपल. और वी नीड like now we have this Roshan clinic in Chungi, so it is easier to stay connected with people. और जैसे अमीम ने कहा कि हम डेटा भी रख रहे हैं बच्चों की, अब हमने सोचा है स्कूल परफॉर्मेंस भी देखेंगे and everything. फिर उसके बाद I think we would love to do that. चुंगी में हम ये कर रहे हैं, फिर जैसे हम expand करते हैं तो we would like to have such, जो कि शरीफपुरा में भी हम चाहेंगे कि ऐसा कर सकें.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if there is like any data about other cities in Pakistan कि वहाँ पर क्या situation है, एक तो वो for comparative purposes. Secondly, are there any like working class areas or low income neighborhoods जहाँ का पानी निस्बतन दूसरे low income neighborhoods के मुकाबले में साफ है? And also like if there is always, it's not always perhaps possible to draw strict boundaries because many of these neighborhoods are like at times like right in the center and surrounded by other housing societies or gated societies. So how do we, or in that sense, even like draw boundaries कि भाई ये एक low income neighborhood है और ये एक affluent neighborhood है, इस तरह का.
So I had two questions. The first one was that there were different tests here for bacteria, like the coliform-contamination test and the E. coli contamination test. My question was, is there a difference between the harmful effects of both those bacteria? And my second question was relating to the point you were talking about, that governmental bodies say that we do not have funding वगैरह ये सब fix करने के लिए, so इसलिए नहीं होगा. So how could that be rectified? Yeah, can it be rectified through private means, through NGOs or other international bodies?
You can hear me right here. So thank you for this. I had two kind of questions, and one building off what Ali just also said. So one thing that's pretty apparent from the hotspots that you've shown is that most of these seem to be village settlements, right? Former village settlements that have become part of the city. So there's something specific about the typology that we're also looking at where these problems exist, and a relationship with densification that's taken place in these neighborhoods over time, जहाँ पे contamination पानी की lines और sewage की lines में हो रही है. So I think Ali की वो वाला जो सवाल है, जो village settlements है उनकी बड़ी खैर over time they expand, but in more recent years within housing schemes उनकी boundaries बहुत defined हैं because वो आबादी दे का इलाका है जो उन्होंने बहुत cordon off किया होता है societies ने. लेकिन एक जो चीज़ हमें काफ़ी worrying लगती है when we work together on water testing in Charrar, and when we went to the cantonment board, one thing initially they were very sort of worried as well, but then they started blaming residents in Charrar, as we were just discussing. but the thing that's worrying is that the solution that they recommended was कि अच्छा यहाँ पे density बहुत ज़्यादा है, अगर हमें कोई intervention करनी होगी तो हमें demolitions करनी होगी, right? So we have to actually demolish houses and then come in and change these lines, otherwise it's not possible. So going back to that question on structural engineering, like what is the point for intervention? How do we have other examples from other places in the world also जहाँ पे इस तरह की intervention successful रही हो? और दूसरा बस ये सवाल था कि यही जो कंटोनमेंट बोर्ड वाले हैं, आई मीन आई फॉरगॉट टू शेयर दिस विद यू गाइस, दे रिसेंटली टोल्ड अस कि आप लोगों ने हमें एक लेटर लिखा था लम्स के लेटर हेड के ऊपर, तो जो कंटोनमेंट बोर्ड वाले से गॉट अ बिट वरीड कि ओ इससे तो बड़ी बैड प्रेस आ सकती है, सो दे रिलीज सम मनी फॉर सम न्यू सीवरेज पाइप्स इन चरर, but they didn't have enough money to proceed further. So apparently 30% who have, there's no way to verify this. But I think the worrying kind of thing then is that they said that they don't have resources to actually go ahead and find money to upgrade the system. And one thing that they suggested was that DHA ने empty plots used to be a source of revenue for them, जहाँ पे एक charge लगता था non-utilization fee का जो cantonment board को जाता था, वो उन्होंने ख़त्म कर दिया है. So it's, you know, I mean, it's linked again to what Dr. Chima was also saying about the lack of resources and sort of fiscal constraints. So anyway, that was more of a comment, but the first question I just wanted to ask.
Thank you so much for the talk. Earlier you just mentioned the comment about कि it's harder to convince people कि कुछ फ़र्क होगा भी, अगर हम, even if we try to make any, and in much of the intervention that community mobilization has been a crucial aspect of it, to bring about awareness, to nudge some behavioral change, right? So when you take, and you mentioned that when you even make the maximum degree of effort in making sure that this problem is like taken as seriously as it is, तब भी infrastructural repair जो है, the possibility of that seems uncertain. So obviously that education is also brought to the community as well, the people who are mobilizing, who are pushing for what's the next step, iske baad hum kya kare, who are looking to you for guidance and stuff. So I'm sure that must affect their ability to want to collectivize again. So I guess my question would be in that state, when you've come thus far, so tab when you are letting the community know कि okay हमें government से ये response मिला है, या this is what they're not budging, or like थोड़ा सा unlikely लगता है, uncertain लगता है future, लेकिन if we want to bring change then we need to still build momentum and make sure that that continues for over a period of time. So usme what is the kind of response that you receive, and how is that response different from men versus women, mothers versus young individuals who don't have children, but they know but they are being affected by it, children, even if you do engage with them, what do they think about it? How has that experience been, and what responses have you gotten from the community when they get to know okay this is the state of affairs when we talk about repair and improving water quality?
I just had a small question about to what extent does water distribution influence this issue at hand? Pakistan's canal water, almost 50% of it is allocated to Punjab as compared to like 3 to 5% to Balochistan. So would you perhaps suggest dealing with this problem at a provincial or even perhaps a national level as compared to the districts that you mentioned?
To be uniform in all low class or low income areas, or it is more to in a specific cultural or more occupational way?
I think जो specific areas, I think आपका भी सवाल, कासमी साहब का भी और फिजा का भी, I think what Fiza said is absolutely correct. I think that's what it is, कि ये ज़्यादातर जो areas हैं ये वो areas हैं जो formerly villages होती थी, लेकिन उनके अराउंड फिर शहर ग्रो किया है. तो शहर करके कराची में मैंने गोट कहते हैं, यहाँ पे यहाँ पे क्या कहते हैं, पिंड कहते हैं यहाँ पे. ये सारे वो एरिया. So these are people who've kind of been left off of the train of development in some ways, right? So and there is a very specific class character to them. सो इन एरियाज़ के अंदर आप जाएंगे आपको बहुत क्लियरली आपको वो नज़र आएंगे. And you know like the you know related to Kasna, I think like you know areas where like in terms of examples of areas that have low income areas with better quality waters is usually areas that are not supplied by Vasa. So जहाँ पे जिन एरियाज़ के अंदर ट्यूबवेल ज़्यादा से आता है और वो ख़ासतौर पे वो एरियाज़ हैं जो अभी भी शहर के पेरिफेरी में. बट यू नो लाइक 10 years टाइम व्हेन द सिटी डेवलप्स फर्दर और वो एरियाज़ भी जो हैं वो शहर के बीच में आ जाएंगे. सो दैट्स ओनली अ मैटर ऑफ टाइम. सो यू नो अभी साफ है लेकिन वो वक्त की एक बात है. You know other examples, I think one of the examples that we've kind of inspired us to start with it was Orangi pilot project, which was a very smaller scale focus but a much more entrenched focus. that उसके अंदर जो structural engineering वाला सवाल actually वो उनके लिए बड़ा fundamental था because it was led by architects and so on, and where they did do these kind of more remand और ये सारे issues जो हैं about like कि वो किसी की प्रॉपर्टी आपको ख़त्म करनी है या क्या करना है. सो दे डिड हैव सम काइंड ऑफ सॉल्यूशंस फॉर इट, बट ऑफ कोर्स द like how do you scale something like that? I mean it's a difficult question to answer. And I think this question about the long term kind of कि engagement के आप किस तरह अगर लोगों को लगे कि उनको नहीं फ़र्क पड़ रहा. So I think उसके अंदर I would differentiate maybe like less between sort of of course mothers and children they are remain much more connected, and men are more easily like distracted, let's say. But आई थिंक हमारे लिए जो ज़्यादा फ़र्क नज़र आता है वो आता है कि जिन एरियाज़ के अंदर हमारा अपना इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चरल फुटप्रिंट है उसके अंदर जो है वो सपोर्ट सस्टेन करना इशू के लिए ज़्यादा आसान है. जिन एरियाज़ के अंदर हम भी पैराशूट करते हैं, हम जाते हैं और इवेंट करते हैं वापस आ जाते हैं, उसके अंदर जो है इट बिकम्स मच मोर डिफिकल्ट टू सस्टेन इट एंड पीपल लीव एंड पीपल गेट डिसुएटेड एंड सो ऑन. So yeah.
जो डिफरेंसेस हैं आपने दूसरी सिटीज़ के डेटा के बारे में पूछा, तो आई थिंक इस सिस्टमैटिकली पूरे सिटी का डेटा कलेक्ट नहीं हुआ है कहीं पर. किसी ने लाहौर का भी नहीं हुआ था. देर आर स्पोरेडिक स्टडीज़, फॉर एग्जांपल कराची वाटर प्रोजेक्ट, दे टेस्टेड 100 or 200 samples from Lyari, और फिर उन्होंने कहा जी 80% वाटर सैम्पल्स वर कंटामिनेटेड. सो वी हैव दीज स्पोरेडिक स्टडीज़ फ्राम लाहौर, फ्राम कराची, फ्राम फैसलाबाद, जिससे पता चलता है कि कुछ इलाकों में पानी जो है वो अफेक्टेड है, वहाँ की वाटर सप्लाई. The other thing is that the difference between different areas in terms of microbiological water quality, of course it is different in some areas. जैसे कि मैंने कहा कि चरड़ की situation बहुत ख़राब है in comparison, even when we compare it to Chungi. Maybe the number of affected households is same in both areas, but the number of bacteria or bacterial load in the water supply is much higher in Charrar. और वो हमें फिर waterborne illnesses की prevalence की सूरत में नज़र आता है, because they are like even if they are not ingesting this water, उनका dermal contact, उनकी जो जिस भी तरीके से वो पानी को इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, वो वहाँ पे उनकी the exposure to bacteria is higher in comparison to other areas. आपने किसी ने पूछा था कि difference between, I think वो चलेगा, बैक्टीरिया अलग, दो तरह के बैक्टीरिया हैं तो उनकी क्या डिफरेंस होगा. ऑफ कोर्स दे आर डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ बैक्टीरिया, उसके इम्पैक्ट्स भी दूसरे होते हैं. ये कि वो ज़्यादातर विलेज सेटलमेंट्स हैं, आई एग्री इन मोस्ट केसेस, मगर जैसे खारस मोहल्ला है, इट इज़ ओल्ड लाहौर. सो वो कोई जो है ये नहीं है कि वहाँ कोई विलेज था. हाँ, पुराना सिस्टम था, उसको इन्होंने चेंज किया है. आई कम्प्लीटली एग्री कि जहाँ पे पॉपुलेशन ज़्यादा है वहाँ के ऊपर ये प्रॉब्लम ज़्यादा वो हो रहा है. लेकिन आई ऑल्सो थिंक कि जो डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ मनी है, कि किस तरीके से इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चरल काम किन एरियाज़ में ज़्यादा, बिकॉज ये बिल्कुल क्लियर है कि DHA का पानी वही वाटर बोर्ड साफ दे रहा है और चरड़ का नहीं दे रहा. बाउंड्रीज़ की आपने बात की थी कि हम कैसे डिफ़ाइन करेंगे एरिया की बाउंड्रीज़. एक काम जो हम काफ़ी अरसे से करने का सोच रहे हैं, मेरे स्टूडेंट्स अक्सर सजेस्ट करते रहते हैं कि हम एग्जैक्टली जो बाउंड्री है चरड़ की DHA के अंदर, उधर से पानी कलेक्ट करें और फिर अंदर से करें. बिल्कुल करीब से एंड सी द डिफरेंस इफ़ देयर इज़ अ डिफरेंस. ये अभी हमने किया नहीं है बट विल डू दैट कि ये हमें कुछ क्योंकि हमने कुछ जगहों पे किया है DHA के बिल्कुल बाहर कुछ हॉस्पिटल्स हैं. वी कलेक्टेड वाटर सैम्पल्स फ्रॉम दोज हॉस्पिटल्स एंड द वाटर वाज नॉट कंटामिनेटेड विद कॉलीफॉर्म. सो हमें थोड़ा बहुत आइडिया है. लेकिन येस वी हैवंट डन दिस कंपैरिजन बिटवीन चरर. ये ज़ाहिर है ये ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि जैसे ही हम चरर में दाखिल हुए पानी ख़राब हो गया. आई एम श्योर कि देयर विल बी डिफरेंसेस और हमें उसका हीट मैप टाइप भी बनाना चाहिए आई थिंक. और एक और चीज़ ये है कि वी ऑल्सो बिलीव दैट जितना आप दूर होंगे मेन वाटर सप्लाई एरिया की उससे शायद क्योंकि मेन जो वो है आपका व्हाट इज़ इट कॉल्ड जो वासा का वो होता है ट्यूबवेल. सो नॉर्मली द ट्यूबवेल का जब हम पानी टेस्ट करते हैं इट इज़ क्लीन इन चुंगी एज वेल. सो जितना हम ट्यूबवेल से दूर जाते हैं वाटर सप्लाई लाइन जितनी लंबी होती है उतना कंटामिनेशन के चांसेस बढ़ जाते हैं.
Great, thank you so much. I think we're on time, so I would like to thank both our presenters and also to everyone who attended, who stuck around. I think this is just, as you said, the first part, right? Just raising awareness, but we hope that such dialogues will continue. Thank you so much.